It's a pleasure to be joined by the Howard Stern of SiriusXM's MLB Network Radio, and the and the Ryan Seacrest of the Arizona Diamondbacks radio network. It's Mike Ferrin, a 1994 graduate of Lake Forest High School, who is the host of Power Alley with Jim Duquette on MLB Network Radio from 9 to noon, and the pre and post game host for Diamondbacks baseball. Mike, it's a pleasure to have you. Thanks so much for joining me today.
I really wish that I had Stern's paycheck, because I don't get that from SiriusXM. They're very good to me, but not that good.
You don't have that long-term deal, the weeks of vacation.
That was a good line. Yeah, no, I need that. The 3 months of vacation and the hundreds of millions of dollars guaranteed. Hey, we're nothing without Howard. So
it's true. He keeps the lights on, but that's the dream. I was wondering to start off, wonder if you could take us through your career path coming from Lake Forest High School, going to Loras College, and then what you've done since.
Yeah, when I started at Loras, I knew that I wanted to get into broadcasting, and so my junior year, I was actually doing a musical. I was very involved in theater at Lake Forest High School, and so still doing some in college. And I got involved in a musical about Dubuque, Iowa's sesquicentennial, and it literally came out at the same time that the movie Waiting for Guffman came out, which is about a small town in Missouri's sesquicentennial, an original musical. So this was happening, real life and art were mirroring each other. And one of the authors of the musical, Paul Hemmer, owned a radio station. He had been the morning guy in Dubuque at a big station, or as big a station as there is in Dubuque, for about 35 years at that point, and had left and started his own station. The FCC had licensed a couple of extra sticks in Dubuque, and so he had bought one, and they were just about 2 years in. And so I asked him if he needed any help, and he said, well, sure, why don't you come in and maybe we can use you on weekends? And they decided they wanted me to do overnights. And so that's how I got my start in radio, was because I was in a musical about the city of Dubuque and its history, and started as a classic rock disc jockey in Dubuque in 1996.
Well, it's good to see that there's some success stories to kind of come out of that Waiting for Guffman world. So many are kind of like tortured dentists and dreamers and people like that. Right. But you watch that and you kind of cringe at the aspirations people. But you made it out at Dubuque, so you're a real success story.
Yeah.
You've been a radio broadcaster for some time now, but kind of shifting to real time now. None of that probably could prepare you for a global pandemic. What was it like to broadcast games last season, and then what do you think it'll look like this season with a schedule that's going to stretch over 150 games?
Yeah, so last year was very strange. In fact, I was just recounting this earlier today. The last day of our spring training tour for Sirius, where we go to every spring training camp and do all our interviews, was actually the day before everything shut down worldwide. We were in White Sox camp, of all places. Wow. And it was the first day that they had instituted social distancing with players. The clubhouse was closed, and so we had to do all our interviews with long microphone cords from about 6 feet away. And then the next day, everything changed. I mean, that was that night that Rudy Gobert tested positive for COVID right before the Jazz game, and Tom Hanks came down with COVID, and the world stopped. So what was different was, so for me, I'm the fill-in play-by-play announcer, so I don't do all the games, but I do pre and post for everything. I ended up working at home for the Diamondbacks all year. They had me, I was basically their break glass in case of emergency broadcaster. Mm-hmm. So in case somebody else got sick, because the cases in Arizona were extremely high over the course of the summer, especially when the season started. So I was at home. I only actually went to the ballpark for one game, but did all my work from home, did a lot of stuff over Zoom. We've all become very comfortable with Zoom, right?
Definitely.
And all of our games, home and road, were done from the ballpark, with the road games being done off of a television feed, which is very tricky for radio. Although our lead broadcaster, Greg Schulte, is a tremendous professional, and he did a great job with that. And I think this season is going to be very similar, at least for our radio broadcast. I think it's going to be very similar, at least in terms of, I'll be at the ballpark more, but we'll do everything from the park. I don't think we're going to travel. TV might be a little different, but I think most teams aren't going to travel anyone from the start of the year. And that's because, again, until you start getting more and more vaccines into people's arms, I think it makes it a little bit trickier. So that's kind of what we're looking at, where we're going to be, working remotely. We'll be, in person at home games, but then for the road games, we'll be working remotely.
I think it's, the Diamondbacks really need to persuade the Arizona Department of Health that radio broadcasters are essential workers. You need to get some vaccines. So yeah, that's what I was wondering, whether you're staying at home or traveling at all. So you're going to be at the ballpark most of the season.
Yeah, I'll do. So I work from home for my Sirius show anyway. So I'll do road games. I'll work from home for the pre and post game. But for the home games, I'll be at the ballpark. That's I think it's the smartest plan. It's the safest plan right now.
There was some baseball radio news here in Chicago back in December. Took a lot of people by surprise, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Len Casper, Cubs TV broadcaster for 15 years, suddenly decamped from the North Side and took a job as the radio broadcaster for the White Sox. And I think at first a lot of people thought, could it have something to do with Marquee Network, maybe, making him wear suits during games. And, maybe that was a factor. But he said that really the main factor for him was his love of calling baseball on the radio. He said, quote, broadcasting baseball on the radio has always been my dream. I was wondering, as someone who's done nothing other than broadcasting on the radio, and as a radio host, does that resonate with you, the art of really broadcasting baseball on the radio?
So I was stunned when we started to get the news on that Thursday night. The news started to leak, and I got a text from a reporter friend of mine who was like, "Does this make any sense to you?" And I said, "No. Like, nobody goes from TV to radio. TV's where the money is, right? And generally they don't go across from the Cubs to the White Sox. We've seen it a little bit where, there's certainly more than enough Chicago announcers who've done both teams. Brickhouse did, Milo Hamilton did, Harry obviously did, and that was probably the most high profile defection, as it were, when he went from the White Sox to Cubs. But rarely do you ever see, or not that I could remember, somebody going from TV to radio in that way. And then as it, like, you started to get more confirmation, and you're shocked by it. And I text Len on Friday morning, and this is just his response in giant capital letters. All it said was, "Baseball on the radio is the best." And so, yeah, there is a romanticism to baseball on the radio still, I think. It's a little different now, because and actually probably a little bit easier to access in some ways because it's so portable digitally, whether it's through the MLB app or, in some cases, I know last year they started, geofencing locally on some of the local radio station apps. So like you could listen to theoretically this year, you could listen to the White Sox on the ESPN app and the Cubs on the Score app. And so, like, being able to do that, I think is great. It's portable. Baseball is every day. So you always feel like you have a friend with you, kind of, because it's always there, top of mind. And it is still, that image of being, this theater of the mind, right? And I think that's one of the things that drew me to being a radio announcer and to being a baseball announcer for radio, were those things. So I totally get, how intoxicating that could be, and why Len would be interested in doing it. And the other part of it, and this is something that I think is important to a lot of announcers, is, the TV announcers generally do not call the World Series. When in 2016, when the Cubs made the World Series, Len was calling the fifth inning of those games. This is the inning that Pat Hughes was off. Yeah. And so very rarely do you get those opportunities. There are only a handful of teams that kind of share radio and television broadcasters back and forth. And so there's something about that too, being able to be the local announcer who calls the World Series. And really that's only happened over the last 40 years. In 1981 was the first time that they were doing live local radio broadcasts. In fact, in 1980, there's great audio of the Phillies World Series championship win with Harry Callis, who's a Chicago native, calling it. But that was done as a recreation because they only had the national broadcasts at that point.
Wow.
And so it's it's really something that's happened in the last 2 generations. And I do think that there's something that's, that's important about that. And that idea of being able to call those games on the radio, call World Series games for the team that you're working for. And so I completely understand why Len would want to do that. And baseball on the radio is pretty great.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, you mentioned the playoff aspect of it. Now that the White Sox are really, I mean, they have a great young core, probably going to be in playoff contention a lot more. That's definitely an important factor. But still a shock to everyone, but best of luck to Len on the South side. From 2000 to 2007, you worked in Chicago for WGN Radio and covered the Cubs for, call them the Dusty Baker years. What were some of your favorite memories from those Cubs teams, especially the 2003 team?
Well, I got there in 2000, so I was still during the Don Baylor years, and then I was there for Dusty, and then for the first part of the Lou Piniella year, I left in 07. And I did more studio work, so I was the low man on the totem pole. So I covered White Sox more. I actually covered the White Sox in the World Series in 05, and did a lot of studio producing and anchoring, and so. Some of the memories that I have that are really great ones were, I was at the ballpark when the Cubs clinched the division in 2003. That was really cool, being there, standing on the concourse, getting ready to go into the clubhouse. And, you're standing on the concourse on the third base side to see the end of the game before you go down to get in there, and seeing the double play that ended it. I think it was a ground ball to Alex Gonzalez. It started a double play. And that being there and in the ballpark with that kind of energy, that was something that was amazing. 2001 was my first kind of full year at WGN, and that was a surprisingly good Cubs team. That was the year that they traded for Fred McGriff at the August deadline, or just before the August deadline, and I think it was the August deadline, maybe it was the July deadline. He turned down a trade because he had no trade clause, and Cubs players were pleading with him to accept the deal, and he finally did. And I was there the night that McGriff made his debut. It was on Sunday Night Baseball, and I think they ended up losing to the Cardinals, but I just remember that moment. That was really cool. I was there for Maddox's 3,000th strikeout, which was pretty incredible. That was a neat moment as well. And unfortunately, I was the studio producer cutting highlights for Game 6 of the 2003 National League Championship Series. So the foul ball highlight, I was texting with friends and family who were at the game, and we were texting 5 outs away, and then those outs never came. So I have a lot of those memories. One of the ones that I really love from that wasn't something that happened to me, but my mom is a huge Cub fan, and she teaches at Lake Forest High School. She's one of the voice teachers there.
Right.
And so she's a huge Cub fan, and I was able to get her tickets for Game 1 of the National League Championship Series. And that was a game the Cubs ended up losing in extra innings, but Sammy Sosa hit a game-tying home run in the bottom of the 9th inning. And she said Wrigley Field shook when it happened. And so that was really cool that she got to be there. And then I got to experience that in 2016. I covered the National League Championship Series for SiriusXM and was in the ballpark when Miguel Montero hit the grand slam to put the Cubs ahead in Game 1, and feel the building shake. So I've got that connection to my mom too, she's a major reason why I am a baseball fan.
Yeah, I wanted to ask also about 2016. So were you just there at the NLCS, or did you also make it out to the World Series?
I did just the NLCS. So I was, I generally I've not done World Series coverage for us. I usually do one of the League Championship Series, or did for a number of years. And so the 2016, I was there for, all 6 of the games, the 3 in Chicago and the 3 in Los Angeles.
I mean, you've been a broadcaster for a long time, and now I'm sure you probably shed your Cubs fandom, but that must have been really cool to see Chicago going crazy.
I mean, I go back to the White Sox even in 05. I mean, I got to be there for all of their postseason games, and that was special too. And there were a lot of really great moments in that. And I was grateful to Dave Ennett, still the sports director at WGN, for giving me that opportunity to do it. But to be able to be there for, the series win over Boston, to see all 3 games there, to be there when AJ Pierzynski stole first, for Konerko's grand slam and Podsednik's walk off, and for the Jeff Blum homer. I see Blummer every now and again because he's now a broadcaster for Houston. I like to joke with him that he's the best ever July acquisition to have a statue built of him outside guaranteed rate field. And so I got that experience to be a part of that, and then be there for the parade and be on one of the floats for the parade and all of that. That was a really cool experience. And then to watch the way Game 6 unfolded in 2016 was really cool, because Cubs jumped out to a huge lead. And, once you get ready for post-game stuff, especially with something that's historic like that, the game becomes secondary compared to the moment. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of wanted to soak it in, right? Being a native, having spent a lot of time at Wrigley, knowing how much it meant to people that I knew that were still in the Cubs organization and whatnot. And so I spent a good chunk of that game just walking around the stands and watching the crowd start in the first inning and then continue to grow along Clark Street as it was going down, and looking out, there from beneath the press box, out the windows, either in the back or walking down to that level just below where, the upper deck box seats are, and seeing that was really cool. And more so than anything else in that game, just the absolute euphoria. And when the final out was recorded, just this, almost 100 years it felt like, and granted it hadn't been 100 years since they'd won the pennant, but that feeling of like euphoria and like you were exercising all of those demons, and the roar that went up from Wrigley, I won't ever forget that. And I've got a great picture that my producer took of me standing along the third base dugout anchoring our post-game coverage there, that I really cherish, because that was a special moment, because obviously as a Chicagoan, to be able to see both teams finally clinch pennants was pretty cool.
No, that's a cool piece of history you have. I actually, if memory serves me right, I remember seeing you on the field. Actually, I remember seeing a MLB Network radio mic flag and be like, "Oh, that's Mike Ferrin," and I just see you. What is it like being on in those celebrations, those kind of moments of euphoria? What as you're trying to pull players aside and try and interview them. What are you looking, to glean from the players about that experience?
In that moment, I think it depends on the moment, right? And it depends on who you're talking to. So, some of my favorites have been like, I've been fortunate to do a lot of the post-game interviews, not necessarily just in celebrations. So Brandon Belt hit the game-winning home run in game 2 of the National League Championship Series in 2014. It ended in an 18-inning game. It was a heavily favored Washington team that they beat. And I guess it was in the division series, game 2 of the division series. And so I knew Brandon a little bit. And so to be able to do that interview with him on the field was a really cool moment. This is not a guy that he's got a lot of emotions, but he doesn't show them a lot. And he bat flipped it pretty good. And seeing all of that was incredible. And that was an incredible game. In 2013, when the Red Sox won the pennant at Fenway, which is not something that they had done in that stretch, one of the people that I was most excited to talk to was Jake Peavy, who's a guy that I have a tremendous amount of respect for as a player, and it was somebody that I had known a little bit, and seeing the emotions from Peavy overflow for his opportunity to get to the World Series was really, really special. Same with David Wright with the Mets when they swept the Cubs in 2015. Being able to be around that, see what it meant to him and to Curtis Granderson, and these true pros, to be able to have that opportunity. In 16, it was different because just that pennant was different, and there were enough of those players that had a pretty good idea of history. One of the conversations that I won't forget on the field, though, was with Dave Martinez, now the manager of the Washington Nationals, because David played for the Cubs. And so he knew what it was like to go through a lot of those lean years. And so being able to talk to him, talking to Billy Williams on the field after the game, you think about all those good teams that he was a part of that never made the postseason. those were things that I really took out of it, because it was such an historic event, that you were just happy. You were fortunate to be a part of that, to be able to see history, and just wanted to hear these guys tell the stories of what it meant to them, because they all understood what it was like.
So if anything, it seems like the kind of understated guys who aren't too flashy in the interviews, sometimes the emotion really comes out in those great celebratory moments. It seems like.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just kind of depends. I mean, there are certainly, guys that have been, Sergio Romo was always one of my favorites to talk to with the Giants after they clinched. I covered 3 of their pennant clinchers, and Serge was always very excited. It was like he'd had a lot of coffee, and it was like a little kid. And I loved those moments too. And, but I loved the professionals, loved the guys who were stars. Chris Carpenter, when the Cardinals clinched the pennant in 2011, that was really special, because you knew it was towards the end of his career, and being able to talk to him about what it meant. That was a guy who had been a pretty big star, those things I think really stand out. I remember those moments, and because it's about the players. I mean, that's a life goal for so many of them, to get a chance to go to the World Series, and to be there in that happy moment. And for some of those teams, the last happy moment that they had, because they went on to lose World Series, is I think was pretty special.
Switching more to your time as a national radio host and broadcaster, the baseball season is long, but just as long, it seems like, is the off season. There's a lot to talk about during the hot stove period, but then I'd imagine sometimes you're kind of just counting down to the days towards when pitchers and catchers report. So what, if you can recall, is the most anodyne, off topic, or boring conversation you've had during a slow news day when you're really just trying to plug the gap?
Ooh, boy, that's tough. Boring. uh, boring topics don't tend to do very well on the radio, so I don't know that I have anything that I can think of that is necessarily off the top of my head that would have been, hopefully it wasn't too boring.
No. Yeah. Maybe boring was the wrong word, but
yeah,
most kind of off topic, or not, when you're just looking for something to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, we try to stay pretty grounded in the news with our show. We had a winter where we did interpretive readings from great moments from baseball movies, which included my co-host Jim Duquette's daughter, Lindsay, who must have been like 9 at the time, doing the James Earl Jones speech from Field of Dreams. That one will always stick with me. The People Will Come Ray speech, right?
Yep.
All the constants the constant is the one constant is baseball, and so that was a fun one. We had a lot of fun a couple years ago with the really, really slow free agent market. So that was the year that Harper and Machado signed really, really late. So that would have been going into the 2019 season, going into the
2019, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And so as that dredged on, and that one certainly seemed like it dragged longer than any other one, even this one, which is dragged. But we did a couple of things. We did a fake kind of Civil War letters from the front, of like the cold chill of free agency. That was fun. We also created we did a play-by-play of MLB The Show, the video game, with all of the free agents taking on the defending World Series champion Houston Astros. So like that was one that was fun too. Yep. In just trying to set up to they ended up beating the Astros. I think Mike Moustakas homered twice, because there was basically an all-star team's worth of free agents that were still out there, and we had joked that the mystery team had been added to the schedule. And so those are some of the things that we've done in the past to try and break up some of the monotony of the winter when it can get monotonous. Fortunately, this year has not been the case. We do spend a lot more time discussing collective bargaining than I ever thought I was going to. I am not a labor attorney, and I don't play one on the radio, but I now have a greater understanding of it than I ever hoped to. My dad's the attorney. I would rather that it had stayed in his field, but such is the life when you're covering sports and covering one sport 24 hours a day. So,
especially now, so with the players union and negotiate talks about this season. So as the host of a newsmaking national show, you're not always trying to fill the program. You're making news a lot of times, and so sometimes they get picked. What you talk about gets picked up by the national media. Do you remember a specific quote or interview that really kind of from an interview that kind of got blown out of proportion from your show that you thought, hey, that was not at all what we talked about, and kind of the media runs with it?
No, I don't think that. Well, I mean, I think yes. And actually, now that I do, I think we were discussing earlier this year Chris Bryant trade possibilities, and I had suggested that based um, on what his productivity was and his contract was, that if Washington had really been interested in him, that balancing out the salary by sending somebody like Starlin Castro back would probably work, and that Bryant's value was probably viewed a little bit that was viewed a little bit differently than what most Cub fans had seen with Bryant. That got a lot of attention, certainly. And I felt vindicated when the Cubs traded Darvish to San Diego and everybody was disappointed in the return. And it was kind of like, hey, listen, this is what happens with these contracts and with players like this. And obviously Bryant is going to stay with the Cubs this year. It certainly looks like, and he's been given some assurances at least to start the season with him. So it's a little bit different in that regard, but I mean, it certainly got a lot of flack for something that I said there, but I felt like it was justified based on the research that I'd done and the information that I had. So, in terms of what other people have said in interviews, I don't know that I've ever seen anything that's really been blown out of proportion, or that I can think of that. And certainly we've had things that have been comments that have been picked up or that have been newsworthy from our guests, but I don't think that there's been anything that I look at and that's taken on a life of its own. And certainly nothing has taken on a life of its own where it's, I don't think it's made us part of the story, which I'm really grateful for, because we're just radio show hosts, and the focus should be on the players and the teams that are making decisions, and not on us.
Right. You're certainly not Stephen A. Smith. You're not hosting a First Take type show, but just looking back at some clips over the years, and Ryan Braun and Ken Macha, and then Heath Bell and Ozzie Guillen in 2012, kind of, the comments they made in your show. I think there was just a little bit of press play, but yeah, you're never part of, it's never Mike Ferrin said this. It's usually on what the players and managers say.
Yeah, I don't even remember any of those comments, to be honest. So I don't even know. It was Ken Macha may have been when he was that after the Ryan Braun suspension, or was that after Ken Macha was? Well, I remember us speaking to Ken Macha like while he was driving home from the ballpark the day that he got fired, and he was pretty candid in that. But yeah, I mean, listen, I don't have an issue necessarily with people who feel the need to create hot takes to generate a reaction. Clearly that's what they're doing, but I think that we try to find a different manner of being entertaining, or at least hopefully being entertaining in what we do. It's just a little bit different style, and to each their own.
Right. In 2014, you and your Power Alley co-host Jim Duquette had a pretty ambitious goal you want to broadcast the show from 2 ballparks in one day, and I saw this in the Washington Post. And so you try to broadcast playoff games at Camden Yards in Baltimore, and then at Nationals Park in Washington. Obviously, the only issue there is that you're trying to battle the notoriously delay-prone Beltway traffic. What do you remember about that, and how did that end up going?
Well, we succeeded because we were doing pregame shows. So we had a 2-hour show. Gosh, I don't even remember what order we went in. I want to say it was a 2-hour show in Baltimore, and then had about an hour and a half or 2 hours to get to DC. And we made it in plenty of time. And then we took the train. I want to say that we took the MARC train. They have a commuter rail that goes between Baltimore and DC that I think at least some of us took, but it ended up not being an issue at all. It was kind of fun. It's like doing those postseason shows were a lot of fun for a number of years, because you're getting to see, especially then, because I think it was 2014, that was kind of at the end of this Orioles run that they were on. They made it to the League Championship Series that year before losing to Kansas City. And that was, I want to say that may have been was that game 2 of the Washington series, because that may have been that 18 inning game.
I think so.
And to be honest, I remember less about racing to get to the ballpark and doing that, and more about that game because it was freezing cold in DC that night. And where we go to do the post-game interview on the field, we have to stand in a tunnel that's adjacent to the field. And when the Nationals, there was a controversial decision to pull the starter Jordan Zimmerman out of the game in the 9th, and the Giants rallied to tie the game off Drew Storen. It was really flipping cold. And we had to keep going inside to watch the top of the inning on TV underneath so we could stay warm, and then coming out for the bottom of the inning in case there was a walk-off. And so it was that I remember more of, and that all of the windows to the press box in DC were open, and the DC press box is very high. It's on the 7th story or 6th story of the ballpark. And the writers were freezing and they ran out of coffee. And Jeff Passan, who's now at ESPN, had to go and stand over the popcorn machine trying to warm his hands up. Those are the things that I remember from that more than trying to pull off the 2-city trip. But it went well, went smoothly, and we got all the interviews that we needed. And I think, we probably made a bigger deal out of it than it ended up being.
Any plans to do anything like that in the future? Maybe obviously once the pandemic's over, but maybe Chicago, maybe LA, any other city, New York cities with 2 baseball teams?
Yeah, I mean, I think we would certainly do that. I mean, I think I don't know if we've done the 2 New York shows on the same day. I know we've covered New York teams at the same time. I did post game for Milwaukee and Philadelphia 2010 game 4, and then raced to what was then US Cellular Field for game 3 of Rays White Sox in the same day, and did on-field interviews in both sites. So I did the clubhouse for the Phillies, and they clinched the division series that year, and then got in the car and drove down, still reeking of champagne, drove down to US Cellular Field, got to the game in about the 3rd inning, and then did a post-game interview on the field with Dwayne Wise. I remember that. So we've done a couple of those things. I think it just depends on the layout and the schedule. And I don't know what happens post-pandemic to any of our travel plans, but I would assume that, knock on wood, we're planning on doing all our All-Star game coverage this year, and hopefully in the postseason we'll be a little bit back to normal and at least get to go some places, if not to two cities the same, or 2 ballparks in the same city in the same day.
That would be nice. In one perk of being on SiriusXM with satellite radio is that you really have a kind of a wealth of music selection. And I know you come from a kind of a radio DJ background in Iowa. Do you have any say over what's played in the bumpers between commercial breaks, or is that solely up to the producers?
Yeah, I stay in my lane for the most part. I mean, they know that I don't like Billy Joel, so they tend to play Billy Joel a lot.
Yep.
So they know how to keep me in my place. We have 2 outstanding producers, Brady Gardner and Hunter Reiser, and Hunter has been the producer on our show for, I think it's 8 years now. And Brady and I had worked together nights and have been friends for a long, long time too. And so they have a really good feel for what fits and what works. And they handle all of the production stuff. They can do that. They handle organizing the show, booking the guests, doing all that stuff. And it really is nice because they do such a fantastic job with that Jim and I can just focus on screwing around.
I mean, that's all I could ask for really as a host. We talked about this before we started recording, but as your 620 The Zone Stibbs TV intro song touches on,
you went deep on the research.
I did my research.
Holy smokes, man! Yeah. This is some prep.
That's it's what I try and do. The song touches on, you kind of have rather fair Midwestern skin, which of course I share. Now that you live year-round in Arizona, how does that skin hold up in the desert, and what SPF are you rocking with? Please?
So it's funny you mentioned that. I actually tan pretty well. So
really?
I am fortunate in that, despite the fact that I am a bit of a ginger, I actually do take on some color. All right. So I it's really nice to go home to Chicago in the middle of winter and being just a little bit tan
Yeah.
and seeing the family. That tends to make them angry. So, and anything I can do to tweak them just a little bit. I love the needles, so
Yep.
it's great that it works out. But yeah, I mean, I love the sunshine. I love being outside, so it makes it a lot. It makes it a lot easier knowing that I don't have to put SPF 320 on. So.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, a lot of us Midwesterners and people who live up north can't seem to make that transition. I certainly can't. I can't tan to save my life, but that's good that you can. You've acclimated yourself to the Arizona weather. We've talked a lot about Mike Ferrin, the broadcaster, but how about, and how's this for research? How about Mike Ferrin, the thespian? How's this? This is your this is
the Theater Wall of Fame, huh?
Yeah, the Theater Wall of Fame at Lake Forest High School. I really some incredible notes on here and photos as well. I'll put it up for the camera one time and see if you remember anything from it.
Sure.
So you know, had a lot of experience on stage at Lake Forest High School and then at Loras College. How did your background in theater prepare you for a career on air?
I think it prepared me pretty well. I mean, between that and I also competed in speech in high school and in college, and I think it was extremely beneficial because you get used to performing and speaking in front of groups of people. Yeah, in radio, your audience is invisible, right? In broadcasting, your audience is invisible, but you still have to envision them being there. And I think that all of the skills that I learned either from performing on stage or from singing or from trying to connect to an audience to make things conversational, I think were extremely important. I'm not sure that that I can think of another path that would have gotten me to where I am without doing that, because I think that those are incredible skills, because it's very similar to what I do now. I'm performing every day. I just am not performing as Tevye and Fiddler on the Roof. I'm performing as me, and I try to be authentic. I mean, I don't think that there's anything about me on the air that's phony. At least I hope that there isn't. But I do think that it gives you that comfort level with being able to perform and understand how to entertain, or at least hopefully entertain, I should say.
Well, you have to be comfortable when you're making 20 costume changes over the course of 2 hours and you're playing all but 2 of the female roles for the complete works of William Shakespeare abridged. I mean, what was that like? Please take us through that specific point.
That show is really fun, and I did that with John Burney, who ended up being the dean of students at Drake University, and Doug Donald, who just retired as the theater director at Loras. He was a speech communications professor at that point, and Doug and Lenore are 2 of my closest friends still. I just saw them last winter, and it was great because the 3 of us were friends anyway, and we had just a ton of fun performing it. And more than anything, it was a chance for the 3 of us to screw around, and so we did. we goofed off, and the script is really funny because you're trying to do all of Shakespeare's works in an hour and a half, and you get to intermission and you realize that you haven't done Hamlet yet, and the whole second act is Hamlet. So and then they do Hamlet, I think, backwards, right, in like 3 minutes at the end of it. So it's the whole thing was really, really funny, and those guys were a blast. And Doug still performs a lot. I've lost touch with John a little bit over the years. When I lived in Baltimore, he came out. He was a big Orioles fan, and he happened to be in town for a conference, and we went to a game together. I haven't talked to him in a long time, but Doug and I still keep in pretty regular touch, and he's just an immensely talented performer and writer and director, and still does a lot of Mark Twain stuff in Eastern Iowa, and just a tremendous friend and guy.
Do you ever feel the theater bug biting anymore, or any aspirations to get back on the stage, or is that time going past?
Not really. My parents are great. They really encouraged me to major in theater. and they felt like it was something that I could do, and it just like I enjoyed it. But I enjoy this more. I mean, I still get to perform every day.
Yeah,
It's just
totally.
I get to react to real life events, and really I get to spend my entire day talking about baseball. So like to me, this is better than pretending to be someone else. This is, I get to be a performer, but I also get to perform talking about something that I really love and that other people do too.
You're living the dream.
Yes.
I absolutely. I have a few rapid fire. I mean, you can
Okay.
expand on these for however long you want, but a few kind of definitive questions. First one: what stadium has the best press box food?
Well, San Diego's is pretty good. That's always been near the top of my list. Miami's is really good. I really like Miami's press box food. Philadelphia, what's that?
Are the Clevelander chefs kind of making food for the press box?
No, it's a little bit different than, well, they've shut down. They kind of, Jeter had, when Derek Jeter took over as the president and CEO of the Marlins, they shuttered down some of the more colorful parts of the Miami landscape there, but which is kind of disappointing because I actually really love that ballpark because it is kind of funky and different.
Yeah.
No, but everything has a Latin flair in terms of the food. It's very Cuban influenced, and the food is delicious. The best selection plus the best ice cream is Philadelphia. And Frank, the guy who runs the ice cream at Citizens Bank Park, is awesome. Like he's the nicest man, and they always have like this incredible collection of, I think it's Turkey Hill ice cream, and like it's really, really good. So those would be the ones that are at the top of the list.
It's always nice when teams kind of spoil the media that's covering them.
I mean, we have to pay for it, so
right,
like it's not like it's free. So yeah.
What is, as a Diamondbacks broadcaster, you talk about the flourishes of Marlins Park. What's the funniest incident you've seen at the Chase Field pool?
There hasn't been a really crazy one that I can think of. There have been some ones that I've heard of that maybe involved having to get binoculars out.
Oh, no.
When the Diamondbacks clinched the wild card berth in 2017, all the players went and celebrated in the pool. Watching them get Paul Goldschmidt into the pool area was really fun. Like that was cool because Paul is a very reserved guy. Yeah. So watching them party in the pool was probably the craziest thing that I've seen. But I can't think of anything where I've gone like, this is really nuts, which is kind of disappointing, right? Like you want something crazy to happen because there's a pool in right center field.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, over the years seeing, fans kind of dive into the pool for a ground rule double or a home run. It's always fun. It's kind of like I think the Jaguars stadium kind of has a pool as well. Anytime fans get into a pool, it's always fun to watch.
It's not pool related, but one of my favorite moments was we were doing that. We do a post game kind of coffee clutch with the other broadcasters on radio for home games. And it was family picture day, and Chris Owings, who's now with Colorado, was on the Diamondbacks roster, and he and his wife had their dog there. And CO is just a tremendous guy. And we're in the middle of doing the post-game show, and CO's dog goes running out into center field and stopped and took care of business right in the middle of the outfield while we're on the air. So we were howling and watching, like the only thing in the outfield was CO's dog. So that's the. It may not be a pool story, but it's got 3 letters.
That's a good highlight.
So, yeah.
That's the downside. The side of bark at the park, or those kind of dog outings that they never really, or family outings that they don't show you. Who's the best interviewing the Diamondbacks right now?
Ooh, Stephen Votto is, and I've known Stephen for a long time, and he's just a great person. In addition to being a great interview, he could be a broadcaster or a coach or whatever he wants to do when his career's over. He went to a couple All-Star games at the A's. He's a great story of, small college guy who basically made his career. I think he started his big league career 1 for 33. He always has something thoughtful to say. So I would see Votto is definitely at the top.
How about around the league at MLB Network Radio? Who's the guy you always like to talk to, whether it's in the front office or a player, even an agent?
Well, I like the front office guys with good senses of humor. So Rick Hahn has a tremendous sense of humor, the White Sox general manager. David Forst, the GM of the Oakland Athletics, has a really good one. Cleveland's GM, Mike Chernoff, is really funny. And Mike's dad is actually the program director of WFAN in New York.
Wow.
And so he's got some pretty good feel for that. So I enjoy that. In terms of players around the league, Kike Hernandez, now with the Red Sox, is a huge personality, and he is a lot of fun. I haven't interviewed him a ton, but every time I've done it, there's something that's incredible that comes out of it. Joey Votto is unbelievably smart.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate to do an interview with him right around the holidays where we spent more time talking about chess and like what he's doing in quarantine. And like, you can go anywhere with Joey and he's going to have a really thoughtful answer. Votto is one of my favorite interviews right now. There are a number of guys that are great like that. A lot of former players too. Like, I love Mike Cameron. Mike Cameron was a great interview as a player and is a great interview now that he's retired. And there's a lot of guys that are really, really fun. I worked today with Yonder Alonso for the first time he'd ever done radio, and he's going to be a star. Like, that guy was unbelievable.
It's always great when you get a nice, colorful player,
Yeah,
or guy in the front office. Speaking of that, here's a hypothetical for you. The Diamondbacks just had a great game, but you're only allowed a post-game interview with one player. Do you interview the pitcher who just threw 8 innings and allowed 1 run, or the position player who hit 4 for 5, 2 home runs, and 6 RBI?
So I'll give you a little behind the scenes on it. The odds are overwhelming that I will interview the position player, because usually if the pitcher only went 8, he's back in the showers and in the clubhouse.
Yeah.
So if you're going to get him on the field, you're going to get the position player.
Okay. So you want him to go complete game. You might get the pitcher.
They'll go for the pitcher. Yeah. If he throws a 3-hit shutout, I'm going. We don't see many complete games anymore, so I'm going there.
Interesting. Okay. And usually position players are on cloud 9 when they have a good hitting game. So you usually want to talk to them, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on their personality. There are some that even after they have great games don't necessarily want to talk about themselves, and that can make it a little tough because the post-game interview tends to be all about them. But usually, like, taking you through a moment. There was one of my favorites that I remember is we had in 2019. There was a game against the Dodgers. They had a bar crawl at the ballpark. They had decided to do a bar crawl inside Chase Field because it's hot as heck in the middle of summer. And this was August in Phoenix, right? So they had done that before the game, and it was also Hispanic Heritage Night. And they had mariachi bands were playing in the outfield. It was the biggest crowd in Chase Field history. Wow. 50,000 people. Whoa. 50,000. Diamondbacks take a late lead in the game. They have the bases loaded with one out, or bases loaded, nobody out in the 9th. LA does, and Archie Bradley gets, I think, a strikeout, and then this incredible 3-6-1 double play to end it. Christian Walker was the first baseman. He had the big hit in the game, and he started the double play with an incredible diving stop. And getting Walk, he's an intense guy but a friendly guy, and getting him off the field, he was practically hyperventilating while doing the interview. That's my favorite post-game interview I've done with the Diamondbacks, without a doubt. He was still so in the moment that he gave such granular detail of what happened on this incredible play to end the game. It was really cool.
That's great. With an atmosphere like that, with all the fans everywhere, that's really cool. When athletes kind of do that LeBron James type analysis of every, in the moment play, that's really cool. And kind of talk, one final rapid fire question on that theme. What's your favorite or least favorite cliche baseball answer? Is it we're trying to take it one game at a time, or I got to give credit to my guys out there for helping me out? Or, pick your favorite, whatever.
We don't get a whole lot of those anymore. Like the Bull Durham ones, I think, are so that they're almost passé in terms of cliche. I think it's after a pitcher's had a rough day and he said, well, I had good stuff.
Yes.
And it's like, did you
really?
I mean, sometimes they're right. Sometimes they did, and other guys just hit them where they ain't, but sometimes they aren't always the best self-evaluators in that. So that's one that I could do without. I could do without, sometimes there are vague comments about approach and there's no follow-up on it. Like you don't get into the specifics of it, but that's more on the reporter than it is the player. So I would say that those are some of them more than anything. I don't really, there's a lot of we get cliches more from managers probably because we talk to managers twice a day, but you're going through a losing streak and your team is fighting real hard, you're still fighting and all that, and it's like, okay, we got to, it's maybe we should switch up the adjectives down again.
Right. Well, I mean, unless you got anything more about the season, we're wishing you a great season down in Arizona for the Diamondbacks. Appreciate you coming on. It was great. Really, really insightful and cool interview. So I appreciate you joining me. This is great.
Well, it's a thrill for me. I mean, it's been a while since I've been back to the high school, and obviously, I was born and raised in Lake Forest, so it means a lot. And I'm really, grateful to you to reaching out, and I'm so excited for the future of both the high school and so many students there, and so many people who have, who've made their way into sports media. Like so proud of what like Sarah Spain has accomplished, and just being able to see that there are continue to be opportunities out there, I think are really, really great. And I'm extremely grateful that you reached out to talk.